Worms don't avoid your garden because they're lazy. They avoid it because most growers are feeding plants, not soil life. And when you treat your beds like a nutrient delivery system instead of a living ecosystem, the worms leave or never show up in the first place. The real consequence is simple: compacted soil, poor aggregation, inconsistent moisture retention, and crops that rely more and more on inputs just to stay average. Worms didn't show up in my beds for years. Not in my raised beds, not in my in-ground rows, and definitely not in my hydro experiments where I was trying to transition back to soil-based systems. I had organic matter, I had compost, I had mulch, still no real worm activity. That changed when I started using one specific humus trick, not the dip, but true humus-building biology. And if you're serious about soil performance, you'll want to pay attention. If you care about real results and not gardening folklore, subscribe to the channel. This is about what actually works in beds that produce food year after year. The mistake most gardeners make is confusing compost with humus. Compost is not humus. Compost is a transitional material. It's partially decomposed organic matter. Humus is the stable, microbially processed end product that actually binds soil particles into aggregates and holds nutrients in a plant-available but non-leachable form. When I was top-dressing my raised beds with 2 inches of finished compost every spring, I thought I was doing everything right. But the compost was breaking down fast, especially in warm seasons. It fed microbes briefly, spiked bacterial activity, then tapered off. The worms would show up for a week or two after application and then disappear because the food source wasn't stable. The trick was shifting from just adding organic matter to actively building humus in place. The humus trick that finally brought worms in consistently was pre-inoculated humic slurry combined with fine carbon and moisture control. Here's exactly what I did. I took well-aged compost, at least 6 months old, dark and crumbly, and screened it through a 1/4-inch mesh. Then I mixed 1 part of that compost with 1 part finely sifted leaf mold and 1 part biochar that had been pre-charged in diluted compost tea for at least 10 days. To that mix, I added water until it formed a thick slurry, not watery, but like pancake batter. Then I added unsulfured molasses at a rate of 1 tablespoon per gallon of slurry to feed microbial activity during application. This wasn't about dumping nutrients into the soil. It was about inoculating the soil with stable carbon complexes and active microbes that would convert residues into humus inside the bed. I applied this slurry at a rate of about 1 gallon per 20 square feet in my raised beds, pouring it directly onto the soil surface under mulch. Then I covered it immediately with 1/2 inch of shredded leaves or straw to maintain moisture and protect microbes from UV exposure. Within 3 weeks, I started seeing worm castings on the surface, not randomly, consistently. Worms respond to stability, not spikes. One reason worms avoid heavily fertilized gardens is salt concentration. Even organic fertilizers, especially pelletized ones, can create localized salt hotspots. Worms are extremely sensitive to that. If you've ever wondered why your bed looks biologically dead after adding high nitrogen inputs, that's usually why. The humus slurry method doesn't spike nitrogen. It builds microaggregates. Those aggregates create microscopic pockets where moisture and microbes coexist in balance. Worms move toward that environment because it's stable and safe. In my in-ground garden, which has heavy clay soil, I tested this on a 10-foot row of tomatoes. I incorporated the slurry lightly into the top 2 inches using a rake, then mulched deeply with 3 inches of chopped grass and leaves. I didn't till. I didn't flip the soil. I left structure intact. Before treatment, I could dig a full spade and find maybe 1 or 2 worms. After 6 weeks, I counted 14 worms in a single shovelful. That's not theoretical improvement. That's measurable biological density. Moisture management is the second half of the trick. Humus forms in environments that stay consistently moist, but not saturated. In raised beds, I adjusted irrigation to shorter, more frequent cycles. Instead of soaking the bed once every 3 days, I watered lightly every day or every other day, depending on weather. The goal was to keep the top 4 inches damp, but never waterlogged. In hydroponic transition beds, where I was converting from inert media back to soil, I mixed 20% of that humus slurry blend directly into cocoa coir and compost at a 1:4 ratio. That stabilized the media. Worms eventually migrated in from adjacent beds once the environment stayed moist and microbially active. The biochar component is critical. Uncharged biochar is a mistake. It can temporarily tie up nutrients and repel biology, but when it's soaked in compost tea or even diluted fish, hydrolysate at 1 tablespoon per gallon for at least a week. It becomes a microbial housing structure. It holds moisture, buffers nutrients, and acts as long-term carbon scaffolding for humus formation. In my beds, I use biochar at about 5% of total soil volume, not more. Too much can create drainage issues in already loose soils. Leaf mold is another overlooked piece. Leaf mold isn't compost, it's fungal-dominated decomposition. Worms love fungal environments. Most garden compost is bacterial heavy. When I started blending leaf mold into the slurry, worm activity increased dramatically compared to compost alone. If you don't have leaf mold, pile up deciduous leaves, keep them moist, and let them break down for at least a year. It's slow, but it builds the kind of fungal networks worms thrive in. Stop disturbing the soil once worms arrive. The biggest mistake after seeing worms is tilling to spread them around. That destroys channels and collapses aggregates. Once I stopped tilling entirely and relied on surface applications of humus slurry twice per season, early spring and mid-summer, worm populations stabilized. In smaller backyard gardens, even a single 4x8 raised bed can benefit. For that size, you're looking at about 1.5 to 2 gallons of slurry per application. Don't overdo it. More isn't better. Consistency is better. In larger plots, scale gradually. Test one section first. Measure worm density by digging a 12-inch cube of soil and counting visible worms. Do this before and 6 weeks after application. Let the results guide you. There are trade-offs. If you rely heavily on synthetic fertilizers, this method won't shine. High salt levels suppress worm populations. If you're transitioning, reduce synthetic inputs gradually over one season while increasing humus-building practices. Also, in extremely sandy soils, you'll need more frequent applications during the first year because carbon leaches faster. In heavy clay, improvement is slower but more dramatic once aggregation starts. One unexpected benefit was improved root structure. In beds treated with the humus slurry, root systems were thicker, more fibrous, and penetrated deeper. Worm tunnels acted as natural aeration shafts. I noticed fewer issues with blossom end rot in tomatoes, likely because moisture regulation improved and calcium uptake stabilized. This isn't about chasing worms for the sake of it. Worms are indicators. If they're present in good numbers, your soil biology is functioning. I've tested simple compost additions, manure top dressing, cover crops, and even vermicompost teas alone. They all help, but none created the sustained worm population increase that the humus-focused approach did. The key difference is building stable carbon complexes in place instead of constantly adding fresh organic material that burns off. If your soil feels powdery when dry and sticky when wet, you lack aggregation. If water pools instead of infiltrating, you lack structure. If you rarely see castings on the surface after rain, worms aren't thriving. Start with one bed, screen your compost, blend it with leaf mold and properly charged biochar. Apply it as a living slurry under mulch. Maintain steady moisture. Stop tilling. Measure results. Gardening advice often tells you to just add compost. That's incomplete. Compost feeds the system temporarily. Humus builds the system permanently. Once worms establish stable populations, they do the tilling, nutrient cycling and aggregation for you. At that point, your job shifts from correcting problems to maintaining balance. That's the difference between managing inputs and managing ecosystems. If this kind of practical, field-tested information helps you grow better food with fewer inputs, subscribe to the Husbandry channel. Share this with another serious grower who's tired of surface-level advice. The more gardeners who understand how to build real soil biology, the better food we all grow, and that's something worth spreading.